like if we want to teach our kids an evidence-based way of thinking about food, and we just want to teach them like factual information, nutrition is not like a 2-bucket or 3-bucket system. And what's good for someone in one moment might not be good for someone in the next moment. And what's good for you might not be good for me. And so there's a lot more nuance than just green light, red light, good, bad.
Welcome to PedsDocTalk TV and this episode of the PedsDocTalk Podcast, where you can catch my amazing conversations with guests on the show here on my YouTube channel, or if you prefer audio only, wherever you access podcasts. I'm Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician, lactation consultant, and mom of 2, and I'm here to uplift, support, and guide you so you can raise those incredible kids. Let's get to today's amazing conversation.
My guest today is a social media favorite of mine. She is Dr. Taylor Arnold, PhD, dietitian, and founder of Growing Intuitive Eaters, and she's on a mission to foster a healthy relationship with food and teach adults how to talk to kids about food in a positive way. And we're going to be chatting about red light, green light foods, why labeling foods as healthy or unhealthy or good or bad can actually do more harm than good. So thank you for joining me today, Taylor.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. This is one of my favorite topics, so I can't wait to chat about it.
Yes, and I'm finally happy that we could connect. I know I've wanted you on the show for a very long time, and life and having children and owning a business and just everything got in the way. So I'm happy that we finally could have you on the show. So thank you for being here. And obviously, I know who you are. I love your account. But if anyone's not familiar with who you are, if you can just tell us more about yourself and what brought you to start Growing Intuitive Eaters.
Yeah, so I'm a dietitian, nutrition PhD, and mom of 3. And my passion is working with parents to break the cycle of disordered eating that so many of us were raised with, to raise kids who are intuitive eaters, who nourish their bodies, to help parents like learn how to talk to their kids about food, and enjoy the science of nutrition with their kids without any guilt or shame that so much of nutrition information has now on the internet. And Growing Intuitive Eaters, I have courses for parents, which are all 100% free. That's another one of my passion, is making nutrition information accessible and affordable to all parents. And so one of the ways I did that is made all of my courses and content for free. So you can find that on my YouTube page.
Well, I love it. And I have a shared passion for raising intuitive eaters and also really undoing a lot of this narrative that we have been raised in, like you said, and a lot of this narrative that still is prevalent in medical healthcare systems, you know? And so what we're talking about today is actually one of those examples, the labeling of unhealthy and healthy foods, especially when we communicate with children in our office and how that can be harmful. So for anyone who's not familiar with what we're talking about, either whether it's red light, green light, or just the labeling that we're talking about, can you explain more about what this is, where we commonly see it, or you see it as well?
Yeah, so the red light, green light diet is a diet that was developed in the 70s. And that the intention of the diet was pediatric weight loss. And so they labeled foods as green light that were very low in calories, and foods as red light foods that were very high in calories. I was actually just reading a paper about the history of it right before this podcast episode. And one of the creators of the diet said, we want to leave room in the diet for treats like avocado. And I was like, what?
Avocado's a treat? Oh, okay. Yeah. I love avocado, by the way. So I'm like shocked.
I love avocado, but I wouldn't consider that I don't think many kids would consider that as a treat. But the goal of the diet was to make fat kids not fat. So, and now we kind of see the red light, green light thing has taken off in books, and just discussing foods that kids should quote unquote should eat a lot would be green, and should not eat a lot would be red. And so we really see this dichotomous view of food. And some parents might label food as good or bad, or always foods, or sometimes foods. And regardless, that is kind of separating food into 2 to 3 buckets, which we know from the research is not helpful, can be associated with disordered eating behaviors. And I also think it's inaccurate. If we want to teach our kids an evidence-based way of thinking about food, and we just want to teach them like factual information. Nutrition is not like a 2-bucket or 3-bucket system. And what's good for someone in one moment might not be good for someone in the next moment. And what's good for you might not be good for me. And so there's a lot more nuance than just green light, red light, good, bad, always food, sometimes food, good for your body, good for your soul, however you want to do it, whatever you want to say, however you want to fluff the words. It's still like a dichotomous 2-bucket system, or a 3-bucket. I don't know what the word would be. It's not dichotomous because it's 3, but
yeah, trichotomous. We'll create a word today. Let's create a word. But I totally agree. And I mean, I think in school systems too, they still are using this sort of kind of this sort of dialogue in terms of when they do their own nutrition counseling for children in schools, right?
Yeah, I mean, this starts really early. Like we see kids in preschool coming home with healthy versus unhealthy food worksheets and being told to sort through. And I actually just had a follower send me one, and all of the healthy foods it was like cucumber, broccoli, and like 2 different fruits. And then that was in the healthy. And in the unhealthy, it was like hamburgers, French fries, ice cream, and another dessert. And I was looking at this, like if I had a child come to me in my private practice who was only eating cucumbers and fruit, I would be way more concerned about them than a child who was eating a hamburger and French fries. So it's just it's not an accurate way to teach kids about nutrition. It's a scare tactic, which we know does not promote behavior change in kids. And it's just not I just don't like this approach. I don't like this approach. And I think parents are looking for like a really simple way to explain food to their kids. And so they gravitate towards this yes, no, red light, green light. But I think it actually backfires and creates more problems than it solves.
Yeah. And I mean, you talked about obviously that it's going to create problems from a psychological perspective. What would you see there, right? I mean, if we're labeling foods as good, bad, unhealthy, healthy. I mean, I know from my personal experience with families and also personally myself, if someone tells me, Mona, you can never eat a cupcake. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. And then when I get access to a cupcake, I'm going to go buck wild with that cupcake because you know what I mean? So what do you see like in your practice in terms of when we start to create these sort of pedestals and sort of like labels and putting things on higher or lower, value? I'm curious how it does on that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's very like it's a simple fact in human psychology. When we make something like elusive or forbidden, it's now a desired thing, especially in kids. And I actually have a couple articles. I can rattle them off real quick and I can send them to you for the show notes if you want to put them in. But we see like dichotomous thinking in adults can exacerbate eating disorder symptoms. That's from a 2011 paper. We see that not thinking about food in a polarized way, which is like the good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, that actually protects against disordered eating behavior. That's from a 2017 paper. In a 2012 paper, we see that participants who are trained in a mindfulness-based eating intervention, which is similar to intuitive eating, but not the exact same thing, they had less dichotomous thinking. So people who are like approaching the intuitive eating mindfulness-based approach had less of that dichotomous thinking. And then like overall, if we, again, back to the accuracy of this, we want to raise kids who like understand their body and understand how to fuel their body. And when we put foods into these black and white buckets that's very polarized and inflexible, what if something changes? Like what if we say Gatorade it's a red food, they should not be drinking Gatorade, and then they join the football team in Arizona and they have a 2-hour practice in 100-degree heat? Well, they probably should be drinking a sports drink because we don't want them passing out. We want to make sure that they're getting adequate electrolytes. And so now it's not a red light food and it's very confusing. And so if we want to teach our kids like flexible thinking and to understand how to fuel their bodies, I just don't think this is setting them up for success.
Oh, I agree. And I know your whole platform talks about this, and you have always, you talk about scripts, you do some role playing. I love it. I love what you do on your page. And so, a lot of this red light, green light book and this philosophy, a lot of it is still used, like you said, in school systems, but also in healthcare, right? And I will say that we should be monitoring our intake of added sugars, processed foods, high cholesterol foods. Like, I mean, obviously it's okay to eat these things, but we know from a health standpoint that these things in excessive amounts, and okay, what is excessive could be up for debate, can cause childhood obesity, high cholesterol, things like that. So the balance for me, and I think a lot of healthcare professionals are listening, is what would be a better way of approaching these conversations to not shame the foods or place certain foods on higher or lower pedestals, but really just talk about food being food and how we can approach it, and like you've already mentioned and alluded to, in a much healthier way psychologically as well.
Oh, I love this question. I love this question. Okay. So I get parents ask me this all the time too. And I don't think that talk is the way to modify a child's diet. Like sitting a child down and having a conversation with them and telling them this food is bad or this food is good, or here's what this food does in their body and here's what this food does. That's not going to make them eat something or not eat something. Like I think that the talk in these conversations can serve to inform your kids about what food does in their body, which is great, especially for curious kids. We should be teaching them about their body and the science of nutrition in age appropriate ways. But if we want our kids to eat more vegetables, it's not about how we talk to the food or talk to them about food. It's about getting them in the kitchen. How can we do low pressure food exposure activities for young kids? Using play and modeling is huge. How can we, include them in grocery shopping? Can we expose them to media that includes like new types of fruits and vegetables, even like cooking shows for older teens, requiring them to contribute to the meal prep or cooking in the household, just like you would ask them to make the bed or, mow the lawn, depending on what the chores are in your house. Like it's a family contribution. And, I know this is easier said than done too, because for many families, like having access to these foods is a huge barrier. Having the time to cook, like maybe you work, 5 12-hour shifts, and on the weekends, your kids have multiple extracurricular activities and you don't have time to sit down and cook. It can be as simple as like slicing an apple. That is a low pressure exposure activity to a fruit or a vegetable at the grocery store, asking your kid to pick out one new thing. Or even sitting down we shop at Walmart, sitting on the Walmart website and like, hey, you get to pick out your fruit for your lunchbox this week. And my kids are like typing in the fruit that they want and helping me online shop for our groceries. But those approaches to food is how we help our kids expand their diet. And it's not just calling foods good, bad, red light, green light, whatever, or not using those terms. So when you say, well, how can we talk to our kids about food to help them limit those things and eat more fruits and vegetables? I don't think talk does that. It's not an effective way to help our kids change their diet.
No, I can see that, obviously. And also from a modeling standpoint too, right? Showing, shopping, cooking together, all of that. Also us eating a variety of foods and not shaming ourselves when we eat a cupcake or eat some things, right? I think a lot of parents fall into that trap also of like when they're eating something. Like I had a box of Girl Scout cookies and they put something in those cookies that are just better than any other cookie. I mean, let's be honest, okay? And I ate an entire sleeve of of the Thin Mints, okay? And old me used to have guilt with this and, a lot of this sort of like whatever. And I was eating the cookie and I just turned to my son. He's like, Mommy, I want some cookies too. I'm like, yeah, let's eat some cookies. And we enjoyed the cookies. I didn't shame myself in front of him or say, no, wow, we ate all these cookies. How bad of Mommy, right? It was just like, I really wanted cookies that day. And it was delicious. And I have no regrets. You have no regrets. But I think a lot of that is about how we also talk about food for ourselves and undoing what we were told. Because again, this is a whole conversation, right? That I think a lot of us were raised in this sort of labeling culture, finish your plate culture, pedestal culture of like, finish your dinner and I'll go get you ice cream. And so it's like, we're all trying to undo that. And I'm sure you also are teaching people, but doing that yourself as well as a parent too.
Yeah. I mean, so when I say, talk doesn't help our kids eat fruits and veggies, I think the way we talk about food is important, but I don't think we're going to see like a behavior change in a diet variety change just from like informing our kids about food. If only kids were that simple, but alas, they are not. But I also think that when we look at like the roots of this red light, green light diet system in making fat kids less fat, like that is it, like the fat shame and stigma from that, the way we talk about food is really also harming kids a lot. And so when we remove these like types of categories, I also think it's important to acknowledge the importance of, teaching our kids to fuel themselves independent of their body size. Like no matter
Yes.
what size the child is, they deserve to eat, they deserve to fuel their body, and they deserve to be taught how to do that. And we shouldn't be teaching fat kids to fuel their body less than skinny kids. And so I think that's also, really an important thing to be said here.
Oh, I was on a podcast the other day and I talked about the whole higher, lower percentile bias, right? That even in a healthcare system, a clinician is more likely to talk to a child on the higher percentile about what they're eating and how active they are because of their weight. Versus that conversation is not happening as much with children on the lower percentile. And I can tell you from being an Indian American woman, and a lot of our peers are very similar in body frame, very lean. We carry weight in certain parts of our body. It's very common for my type of Indian to be very similar, that you could be thin by appearance, you could be lower percentile by appearance, but maybe you're not exercising. Maybe you're not eating a varied diet. Maybe you are prioritizing one food group and not eating another group. So there is a bias there, like you said, about focusing so much more on the higher end percentile child and, you need to talk about diet modifications and dieting and all of that. And so I agree with you because I see that and my colleagues do it and we tend to do it just from a medical standpoint. And I'm like, we should really be having nutrition and lifestyle conversations with all of our families. And that's why I love being on social media, because you get to do that too.
Yes, but I also think, I want to say in defense of pediatricians here, you guys have so much to talk about in such a short amount of time.
Yes.
It's just unfair to expect pediatricians to be able to manage nutrition for all of their patients, plus all the other medical things we have to do. That's a systemic problem. It's an access to pediatric dietitians who are covered by insurance problem. There's so many things that go into that.
Well, thank you for coming on a pediatrician hosted podcast and vouching for pediatricians. You're the ideal guest. I really appreciate that because it's true. You're right. In my ideal world, if I had my own practice, I would have an hour and a half with patients and I would go through all of the things that I know to be true, like you're saying, but don't often get the time. So I really, really appreciate that. So no, I completely agree with you on all of the things that you're saying. And I love that. And this all obviously lends to that intuitive eater, right? How does that tie in to this whole platform that you have? When we stop to label the foods and create that intuitive eater, and maybe even describing what it means to be an intuitive eater for anyone who's not familiar with that terminology.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. And it's also, this could probably also be its whole own discussion too, because for a lot of what we understand from intuitive eating is intuitive eating in adults. One, listening to what our body needs while also taking into consideration what we need in the future and how we'll feel in the future, and considering the nutrition that our body needs as well. So often in intuitive eating with adults, so there's 10 principles of intuitive eating. And usually we start with things like releasing food rules and adjusting the way we talk about food and food freedom. But after that food freedom also comes, it's called gentle nutrition. So understanding the nutrient needs. Where I don't love vegetables. I'm saying I do not like vegetables that much. I mean, I will eat them and there's certain ones that I enjoy more than others, but at the end of the day, I pretty much always choose a cookie over a vegetable. But I know that my body feels good if I eat vegetables, and it wouldn't feel good if I ate only cookies. So I take that into consideration, and that's part of being an intuitive eater. However, children, it's a little bit different because one, they don't have the same executive functioning skills as adults, the forethought, the planning, the impulse control. These are all things that develop until mid-20s. And in neurodivergent kids, takes longer. And, neurodivergent people, I have ADHD, for example, will struggle with some of those things their whole entire life. And so as parents, it's our job to put in these loving, respectful, and considerate boundaries and implement a practice called responsive feeding to help raise these kids to be intuitive eaters. But with kids, it's not about just letting them eat whatever they want, whenever they want, because that's permissive parenting, and that is associated with negative health outcomes and eating behaviors in adulthood as well. So it's about how can we, it's our job as the parent to serve and provide those balanced foods and help our kids enjoy those foods understanding their sensory needs, understanding their medical needs, understanding where they are developmentally. And so, yeah, did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that. And I know, your page not only talks about that, but it also talks about examples, like I said, of skits and role plays. And I love that.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned something about, and I love this, and it would be my last question, about how, when you eat vegetables, you feel better, like your body feels better, versus if I ate a thing of cookies, I'm not going to lie, it hurts my stomach. Like it actually doesn't feel so great. And I also, for me, again, I like to say for me, because another person might be fine. For me, I feel the after, like I feel bloated. I don't feel great. Do you think it's appropriate to, in your opinion, to talk about children about how they feel with certain foods? Like not as a way of shaming them, but let's talk about if a kid really loves cookies, right? And you're talking about, is it okay to talk to them about, like, well, how does those cookies make you feel? Does it hurt your tummy? Like, how is that? Or do you think that starts to lend to more of this sort of pedestal, red light, green light conversation, or is there some nuance there? I hope that question makes sense to you.
Yeah. No, there's definitely nuance there. First, I think if you're asking those questions in an attempt to restrict their calories because you're worried about them getting fat, then we already have biases in there. And so I would say that's a hard stop. We need to address like your own mental biases and why you're asking those questions. But I think it's absolutely appropriate to encourage our kids to reflect on how they feel. What I wouldn't say is, does that hurt your tummy? I would be like, oh, how are you feeling after dinner? Yes. Like, are you feeling full? Are you still hungry? You want more? What does that feel like to you? What's that feel like in your body? And I would just kind of leave it at that. I recently had a question on my TikTok page about oh, I don't let my kids eat cookies on an empty stomach because it gives me a stomach ache. And so it'll give them a stomach ache. And I was like, well, hold the phone because I can eat cookies on an empty stomach and feel fabulous. I love cookies.
Yes, me too.
So it doesn't make everybody have a stomach ache. And so we're putting our own biases on our kids. Whereas I believe as long as it's not a health risk to them, like in the immediate, we should let them experience those own limits themselves. Because if we say you're going to get a tummy ache when you eat 5 cookies, but they never experience that, they're not it's hard for them to connect that because that's like a really abstract connection. So I will my daughter has had a stomach ache before after eating sweets. And she said oh, I don't want to eat that now. It made me feel bad. But we will also have kids who are neurodivergent and struggle with interoception who may never connect those dots and may need, assistance with talking about that a little more or working with an OT, for example. So there's limitations to all these things and always example or exceptions, I guess.
Yeah, well, I love it because, like you said, I don't say it as it's not a natural consequence because consequence sounds bad, but it's a natural reaction, if you will. Like you said, like my son does the same thing. He'll eat something very sugary, and we again don't have this sort of pedestal environment in our house. And he himself will be like, you know what, mommy, I'm full. My tummy feels okay now, and I don't want to eat more. And I'm like, you're 4, and you're telling me that you understand that this isn't making you feel good. And again, it doesn't come from a place of restriction. It comes from a place of listen to your body. And I think that goes back to intuitive eating, like you mentioned. Oh, I love this conversation. I love you. Okay. Like this is such a great, again, you're one of my favorite follows. We've been trying to make this show happen forever. What would be your final message for everyone listening today?
My final message would be, if you feel like, wow, this is a lot of information, go home, or actually you might already be at home. You might be driving.
Sure that.
Pay attention to the road. But when you have a minute to just think, try to think about the words that you use when you talk about food. And rather than using labels that separate food into 2 categories, including anything that moralizes, which would include bad, guilty pleasure, cheat day, any of those things, try to stop using those words. And instead, I'm going to give you an instead here because it's hard to have no substitutions.
Yeah.
Try to use factual, simple, and non-moralizing terms. So instead of the ice cream is a treat, I might say that ice cream is sweet and it's cold, or the ice cream has sugar in it and fat in it, and that's gonna, make us feel full after dinner. Or instead of saying ice cream is a sometimes food, I might say sometimes I serve ice cream, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I serve avocado toast, sometimes I don't. It's my job to make sure your body gets everything that it needs. And those are less shamey ways to talk about food, and I think more accurate and age appropriate for young kids. So
I agree. And also for adults, by the way, because my husband the other day was really craving these Haribo sour belts. Okay. Like they're those, sour candies. And he's
I
like,
love those.
Yeah, they're so good, by the way. I haven't had them in ages. And I was going to the pharmacy to pick up something. And I'm like, hey, do you want anything? He's like, yeah, can you pick me up a treat? And I said, a what? And I'm like, a treat. And he's like, a treat. I'm like, wait, what do you mean a treat? I'm like, you're 40 years old. What are you talking about? And I'm like, we don't use that. We don't use that word in our house. Like, we don't talk about food as treats. Like, hey, here's a treat, because they tend to be associated with sugary items. I'm like, no. It's not a treat. It's just sour belts. You're wanting sour belts. Have the damn sour belts. Enjoy it.
Right.
And I'm going to have 6 too, okay, when it comes back. But I love this conversation, by the way, because from a personal level, I agree with this. My husband struggles a lot with this sort of narrative because he was fed this a lot and hasn't been able to undo it. And so I'm going to make him listen to this episode and also really take it home. Yes, exactly. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I can have you on the show again and again and again, because I really love the message that you share with everyone. Where can people go to stay connected, find all about your resources that you have, including all your free resources that I know you graciously give to the community?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I'm on Instagram at growing.intuitive.eaters. That's my biggest platform. All of my free courses, which includes raising an intuitive eater, increasing your child's diet variety, starting solids, an evidence-based approach to starting solids in infancy, constipation, and transitioning from milk to formula, as well as my current course that's being released right now, Feeding Kids with ADHD. Those are 100% free, and they are on my YouTube page. I'm launching my website soon. I don't think I've said that on a podcast yet, but I am launching my website soon. That's growingintuitiveeaters.com. It's currently super ugly, and it's not going to be anymore because it's so fancy and exciting.
Oh, I'm so proud of you.
At the end of the month. Thank you. And so that's going to have a bunch more resources, blog posts, and that's where I'll be hosting all my course downloads. My courses often include ebooks and like one-pager worksheets, like about hydration, for example. All 100% free. So tell your friends, send them my way. I want to reach as many moms as possible because we're creating a really awesome community here on Growing Intuitive Eaters.
Yes, and I am telling all of my listeners all about this. And this episode is being released after her website is done. So I'm going to be linking that. So you all will have that, as well as her resources and the links in the show notes. And thank you again for joining me today. I love connecting with you finally on this show. And I cannot wait to send more people your way that may not know who you are, because you do share a lot of really balanced, compassionate understanding of diversity in the feeding space information. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. If you love this conversation, make sure to hit that thumbs up sign, share this episode on your social media channels, and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all future episodes and our weekly educational videos. Have questions or comments? Make sure to comment below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay well, stay loved, and keep on shining.